In his 1943 paper entitled A Theory of Human Motivation, Abraham Maslow laid out a handful of things that he believed drove people into action. The 5 broad categories of motivation that Maslow laid out were physiological motivations, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization, as you can see detailed in this pyramid. The general idea behind the pyramid's design is that the needs of each individual level must be mostly satisfied before people will turn their full attention to items on higher levels. And this makes some sense. After all, if you're running out of food and or water, or are severely sleep deprived, your attention is probably going to be dedicated to resolving that issue before thinking too much about how your boss doesn't respect you or the fact that you lost your keys or some other possession recently. The interesting thing is that this idea can easily be applied to our financial needs as well, and the insights we gain from examining our financial motivations through this kind of a lens can be quite beneficial to us in certain circumstances. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Let's take a look at the hierarchy of financial needs and discuss how it can help us better navigate our financial lives. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a 30-day free trial of Audible and 2 free audiobooks of your choice, as well as a list of some books on money I'd recommend checking out with your free trial. So today's proposed hierarchy is based on an article from the Mad Fientist blog, which I'll leave a link to in the description below this video so you can check out the full thing for yourself. Just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the Mad Fientist's pyramid is made up of 5 different distinct levels, and each needs to be mostly or entirely satisfied before one can turn the bulk of their attention towards reaching the next level. Let's take a moment to go through each of these levels individually. The first level is financial survival. This level is basically where all of us start when we first get out on our own financially, even if not everyone stays there for very long. Unfortunately, it's also a level where we can easily become trapped if we aren't careful. This is because this level is all about finding ways to cover our essential expenses, such as food, water, shelter, transportation, clothing, and probably insurance. Ideally, we'll be able to do this with the income from our jobs or side hustles, but that isn't always feasible, especially at first. So many of us start accruing debt to make ends meet. As you can imagine, this can often lead to a stressful and frantic existence if we stay at this level for too long, and it's one of the reasons why we don't always make the wisest financial choices. For instance, think of payday loans. These are short-term loans that charge insanely high interest rates, oftentimes in the triple digits when viewed on an annualized basis. And they tend to be used by people who need an advance on their salaries to make ends meet in the short term, and have been unable to acquire the money through other means like more traditional personal loans from a bank. Or heck, even credit cards. It's generally advised to avoid payday loans if at all possible, due to those high interest rates. But sometimes people, especially at this level in the hierarchy, find themselves in situations where they don't really have any other options. At the end of the day, if you need the money to put food on the table, then you're going to take the loan to put the food on the table. Because as horrifically bad as these loans can be, it's still preferable to starvation. Another, somewhat less extreme example is buying lottery tickets. Now, spending money on lottery tickets is seen by many as a waste of money, and statistically speaking, it almost always is, due to the incredibly low odds of winning. But if you find yourself in a situation where you seem perpetually trapped in this paycheck-to-paycheck cycle, often with an ever-ballooning mountain of debt around your neck, it can get pretty demoralizing. And after a while, that can create a sense of desperation and desire for any sort of hope of a way out, no matter how unlikely it actually is. So spending money on a long shot like lottery tickets is at least understandable for someone in that kind of situation, even if a more clear-headed examination might find something else that would be a more optimal solution to the situation. So that's the first level of the pyramid. People need to find a way to cover their essential everyday expenses, either with their own incomes or with the help of some sort of debt. The second level in the hierarchy of financial needs is sustainability. This level expands the budgetary scope to include discretionary and other non-essential expenses. But that's not all, because you could theoretically survive for a while by financing these other aspects of your lifestyle with loans. So to truly be sustainable and move on to the next level, people need to be able to cover all of their expenses, including any debt payments that they may have acquired in the previous stage, with their earned income. Statistically speaking, this is where many people sit for a good portion of their working career. They still may be living paycheck to paycheck, technically, but they are at least finding a way to make ends meet. The drawback to staying at this level long term is there isn't a lot of wiggle room or margin for error, let alone surprises. Sure, on the one hand, you are able to cover all of your ongoing regular expenses with the income from your job or side hustle. But on the other hand, one small injury, one small illness, one unexpected expense like a car breaking down could break your budget and send you right back into the debt cycle. And if the surprise is big or bad enough, potentially right back into survival mode. And this leads to an interesting situation, because when you're living on the razor's edge like this, it's much more difficult to feel comfortable taking much risk with any funds you do manage to set aside. This can sometimes lead to people either investing very conservatively, or more often than not investing at all, instead opting to keep all of their money in a savings account or other non-investment vehicles, which admittedly is perfectly fine for things like sinking funds or emergency funds, but for long-term money, it's generally better to put them into some kind of investment that's likely to appreciate or generate income for you in larger volumes than a simple savings account. So while the sustainability level is a reasonably comfortable place to be financially, at least in comparison to the previous level, ideally you wouldn't stop there, and instead you'd move on to the third level of the pyramid, which is accumulation. This is the point where you're finally earning more than you spend and are able to start putting money away regularly. In the previous level, you might occasionally get a bonus or a tax refund or some other unexpected windfall and have the opportunity to put money away as a result. The difference at this stage is you're doing that every month, barring some sort of unexpected expenses. And that changes things, both from a psychological standpoint and from a financial standpoint. From the financial standpoint, now you can finally start getting yourself some breathing room by building up an emergency fund, as well as potentially some other sinking funds, in addition to potential investments. From a psychological perspective, you finally have the breathing room in terms of cash flow, which makes it a little easier to take short-term risks in the hope of realizing long-term gains. It also tends to make those unexpected occasional surprise expenses a little bit less stressful, because you've either already got an emergency fund set up, or you at least have the cash flow to get yourself back above water in a reasonable amount of time. The fourth level in the hierarchy of financial needs is independence. The reality is, if we live long enough, there will eventually come a point where we are physically unable to continue working and earning a living. Therefore, we will eventually need to find a way to fund our lifestyles through other means. The answer to this dilemma is, in a nutshell, financial independence. When you reach a level that your investments or other sources of passive income provide you enough cash flow to realistically cover all of your expenses without needing to ever work again, you can safely assume that you've reached this level in the hierarchy. One underrated aspect of achieving financial independence that often goes unsaid is that achieving it can often make your work life all the more fulfilling. Not just because you have the option to switch jobs into something you're more passionate about if such an opportunity presents itself to you, although that is part of it, but also because you're not worried about something going wrong at work. You're not really worried that office politics or an economic recession, or whatever the case may be, is going to get you laid off because you don't actually need the money. You're working the job, presumably, because you enjoy it. And there's a lot of value of that in and of itself. Now, many people stop their journeys right here. And while there's nothing wrong with that by any stretch of the imagination, you can go further than financial independence. The fifth and final level in the Mad Fientist's hierarchy of financial needs is utilization. According to the Mad Fientist, this is when you know you'll never run out of money, so your sole financial focus is aligning your spending and giving with your life's purpose, whatever that purpose may entail. So that's the hierarchy of financial needs, as laid out by the Mad Fientist. You start off with survival, where you're meeting your essential expenses either with your income or with the help of debts. Then you move on to sustainability, where you're able to meet all of your regular ongoing expenses with your income alone. Next, you start the process of accumulation, where you have enough income after your expenses are already covered to put money away, either in savings, investments, or both. And after a while of doing that, you'll eventually reach financial independence, where your passive income from investments or other sources are enough to cover your expenses without the need for you to continue earning a living. And finally, you've got utilization, where you're unlikely to ever run out of money, so you're able to focus instead on using your money to maximize fulfillment and your purpose in life as opposed to maximizing your returns or your savings rate. However, interesting as these levels may be to discuss conceptually, one thing you'll notice that they don't do is provide you any practical, concrete guidance as to how to manage your finances so that you can move from one level to the next. Which begs the question, what exactly is the benefit from this pyramid outside of it just being an interesting dinner conversation for those of us who love to nerd out about finance? Well, the Mad Fientist argues, and I largely agree with him, that it can be very beneficial to us, especially when discussing or thinking about the financial choices and perspectives of others, such as our friends, friends, family members, a significant other, or heck, even our kids. Because the motivations driving our decisions can and do shift over time depending on where we're at financially and what we're trying to achieve. For instance, someone at level 3 or level 4 may coldly say that payday loans are objectively a bad thing and nobody should ever take them. And they're not, strictly speaking, wrong. I mean, payday loans do suck and should be avoided whenever possible, but as I highlighted earlier, for someone at level 1 who's focused on just meeting survival expenses like putting food on the table, if payday loans or credit card debt or whatever the case may be are the only option that you have, then you take the loans and deal with the fallout later. You're not happy about it, but at the end of the day, you do what you gotta do in that kind of situation. The same goes for a lot of our other choices, like we discussed with investments. For someone at level 3 or level 4, putting all your money into a simple savings account may sound kind of ludicrous. The loss of all that compound interest and purchasing power over the years would just be way too much of a trade-off for what they're getting in return. However, for someone who's living on that razor's edge because they aren't making enough to regularly put money away, the calculus might be very different, at least for the time being. Basically, what I'm getting at is looking at personal finance through this type of a lens can help breed empathy when people are discussing their situations with others, which might make it a little easier for people to discuss this topic more openly and productively. And I think that's worth something all on its own, especially if the person you're discussing the topic with is a significant other, because then you both have a horse in that race, so to speak. Additionally, it helps to put things in perspective. Remember, as much as it may seem like it on the surface, the real goal of personal financial development is not to accumulate a bottomless supply of money. The real end goal is to enable you to live a lifestyle that you find fulfilling, meaningful, and enjoyable. That's why utilization is the top level in the pyramid, and not independence. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.